President Ramaphosa will conclude his African peace mission trip to Ukraine and Russia today with a bilateral with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, in St. Petersburg. On the agenda is Putin's invitation to attend the BRICS summit in South Africa in August and the arrest warrant that was issued by the International Criminal Court against Putin for alleged war crimes. But first, the African peace delegation will meet Putin, who's perceived as the aggressor in this conflict, following yesterday's meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. The delegation is hoping to see the end of the 16-month-long conflict in Ukraine. And for more on this, on the peace mission, we are joined by our correspondent in Moscow, Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, thank you so much for joining us. How has the peace mission gone so far?
Well, indeed, we understand that the peace mission has landed in Russia's St. Petersburg. That's the second largest city of the Russian Federation, and they will be now meeting with the Russian president. So far, the delegation has traveled to Kyiv, where the peace mission has been discussing the prospects for the peaceful resolution of the Ukrainian conflict with the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. And in those talks, we understand they have been described as constructive. Several proposals have been made, but Moscow has been saying before that they have not received any official documents outlining what those peace proposals are, but Moscow would be willing to discuss all of those issues in these meetings taking place in St. Petersburg. Now, we understand that the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa will be the first one to have the bilateral meeting with the Russian President in St. Petersburg today, and then the meetings will be joined by the other members of this African delegation.
Right, and Dasha, I mean, we know that our President Cyril Ramaphosa and, of course, the other African leaders have met with Ukrainian President Zelensky. How did that meeting go?
Well, as we understand, it has been described as constructive. A number of our issues have been outlined and discussed. What we have heard from the members of the African delegation was that it is important to listen to the concerns of both sides. And this is precisely what this delegation is doing, because first of all, they have traveled to one capital and now they are traveling to another country to see what could be done and what are those concerns, how to bridge them. Now, of course, we have seen the reports or outlining what those proposals are. And the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, has said that one of the preconditions for the restarting of the peace process was to withdraw Russian troops. But Russia has been saying that it needs to achieve the goals of the so-called special military operation either through the diplomatic process or militarily, because Moscow says the threats that have been posed to Russia from the Ukrainian territory are unacceptable for Russia's national security. So that could be a non-starter from the very beginning.
And Dasha, speaking of threats, of course, there are currently reports that a Russian missile actually struck on Kyiv took place as the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa led the delegation to Ukraine. What can you tell us about that?
Well, indeed, we have heard that air raid sirens have been on in Kyiv as the African delegation has started their visit to the Ukrainian capital, but Moscow has not commented on that. We understand that there have been many reports. Moscow has suggested that it is carrying out these strikes with high precision weapons against the military infrastructure of Ukraine. So definitely it would be unwise for Moscow to target this delegation. That is important for Russia, because Russia has been building its relations with the African leaders for the course of the past years, and particularly over the course of the past year, we've seen several meetings and official visits of the Russian leaders to the territory of those African states. And of course, Russia would be quite unwise to strike at this very moment. But we haven't heard from Russia's defense ministry on that. Having said that, we have heard the Russian President Vladimir Putin also saying that Russia has the capacity to strike any building in Kyiv or any other location in the Ukrainian territory with these high precision weapons, because he said Russia has managed to destroy 5 Patriot air defense complexes that have been supplied to Ukraine from the United States.
And just for clarity, Dasha, we're currently getting conflicting reports here in South Africa. Are you aware if the president's security detail has now finally cleared customs and are currently with the president?
Well, we haven't heard anything from the Russian sources here or from the Russian officials. Now, as we get the understanding from the media reports, it's been suggested that the delegation of the South African president had to be curtailed in some way back in Poland. They have spent some time on their plane as we get those reports. And it is very likely that that delegation was forced to actually leave Poland back to South Africa instead of joining the president. But that's indeed to be confirmed by the South African side.
All right. And in closing, Dasha, this peacekeeping mission is quite topical here in South Africa, but I'm sure the rest of the world is, of course, watching intently to see what happens after these talks. And judging by the sentiments on the ground on your side, do you foresee an amicable solution reached because of these engagements?
Well, indeed, this peace mission taking place amidst the ongoing offensive by the Ukrainian side, which Moscow says has no chances. Moscow insists it has been repelling all those offensive activities by the Ukrainian armed forces successfully. They have been repelled, and also the Russian president was very clear that Moscow will be achieving its goals. At the same time, Moscow says it has never ruled out any possibility of the peace process, saying that it was Ukraine that has ruled out this possibility in the first place. And the Russian presidential spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said once again Moscow is open to any discussions about the potential diplomatic solution to the conflict. But given the very fact that Ukraine has rejected that at the legislative level, that is very hard to see taking place now. But of course, Russia is still to talk to the African leaders and to see what their proposals are, and of course to see what the concerns of the Ukrainian sides are and how far the Ukrainian side is willing to compromise. Moscow's perception has been that the Ukrainian side is not able to compromise because the Western countries simply do not allow Kyiv to do so.
All right, we're going to leave it there, Dasha, and well, of course, we're going to be watching that story very closely. That is our correspondent in Moscow, Dasha Chernyshova. Our correspondent in Moscow, as I've said, of course, she's giving us the latest on the peace mission to Russia as well as Ukraine.